Hi, everyone, and welcome to our field service webinar sponsored by Fieldpoint, 7 Keys to Master a Growing $1.6 billion field service industry. Thank you for joining us. Today, we'll be breaking down how businesses can conquer integrations, emerging software, and reporting. And if you have any questions today for our speakers, feel free to submit them at any time during our presentation using the Q&A portal at the bottom of your screen. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers, Greg Garrettson, Director of Business Development at Fieldpoint, and Hannah Peacock, Business Process Coordinator at North Mechanical Contracting and Service. Now I'll hand things on over to you, Greg.
Thank you very much, Morgan, and good afternoon and good morning, everybody. Really appreciate everyone making the time here for this session. Really excited to go through some great content together. So what we're going to do today is we're going to begin with exploring some of the most common service management challenges faced across the overall field service and service management industry today. We're going to go through some of the 7 keys from Fieldpoint and North Mechanical's view as to mastering these particular challenges. And of course, we'll wrap up today with a short Q&A at the end. So a little bit about myself. So really, in addition to Morgan's comments, I've been with Fieldpoint about a little over 10 years now. I've worked with hundreds of growing service organizations over my entire career. And for those who aren't aware of Fieldpoint, Fieldpoint is essentially a best-in-class, robust service and project application designed for the growing services enterprise. With me, I'm extraordinarily grateful and pleased to introduce everyone to Hannah Peacock with North Mechanical, who is not only just a very lovely person all around, but someone that Fieldpoint has had the great pleasure of working alongside. So Hannah, would you like to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak today. I've been with North Mechanical for a few years now, and I've had the absolute pleasure of working with Fieldpoint for at least, I'd say probably about 2 years or more going on now. We actually went live with the Fieldpoint software on May 17th of this year, and we are very proud of our success to date.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Hannah. So really going into our next piece here, of course, growth barriers will vary widely based on the uniqueness of each organization, of each of your respective industries in which you service. However, the primary barriers all tend to revolve around things that suitable service management solutions can often solve. So of course, software isn't necessarily the solution to all of life's challenges as it pertains to growing business. However, so much, in fact, the number one tool that most companies can use to overcome these challenges is just service management and just business systems overall. So let's now have a look at some of those common examples that, again, will vary very widely based on the industries in which you service, but these tend to be the most common challenges that organizations face today, right? There's the overall technician productivity and just general efficiency. You're seeing things like subcontractor management. Of course, every organization will use subcontractors, more or less than their peers. This today tends to be one of the biggest trends we find of organizations that are scaling and growing, is growing via things like acquisition or growing via the use of subcontractors, for example, and how we effectively manage them to help us really effectively grow the organization. We see things like delays in scheduling and things like billing, right? Maybe we can get the service done quickly, but how long does it take for us to get the invoice out the door? And more importantly, to start collecting payment and not creating cash flow bottlenecks. We're seeing things like lack of data and reporting to make better business decisions. So it's great that software solutions can help us get a lot of these transactions and business systems through the solutions, but how well are we really using the data that we collect to naturally and organically grow the business? So these, again, really become I would say, the 9 most common challenges we find as a whole across the various industries in which we very commonly service. So what we're going to do now is prompt a poll question for the audience here. So perhaps, Morgan, if you can help us facilitate that. Really, it's the one thing you would like to make better about your current field service solution. Of course, there's lots of things that many could do to make the solution better, but with the screen that's prompted here in front of you now, if you could choose one of these, what would it be? And we'll give everyone a couple of moments here to answer this question. Okay, so already starting to see some of the answers coming in. And so far, it's very heavily leaning towards integrating, all the solutions together, which is fascinating. It's a wonderful talking point that it's just a reminder that there's so many service and just software related options on the market today, but with so many that are so compartmentalized, that are so great in their class, how do we tie everything together? So interesting that so far that seems to be the significant lean on the response, is just the integrating of all the solutions together so that they talk. That's actually going to be one of the talking points today, is this whole best of breed approach, because there's so many vendors out there that can do pieces of the functionality exceptionally well, but what does it cost the business not having everything connect and speak, right? It's that siloing of data that we've all heard time and time again. Very well. So let's move on then to the next piece. Thanks very much for all that participated. That's excellent. Okay, so really, before we now jump into these 7 keys for mastering this growing field service and service management industry, all 7 of these topics are going to revolve around these very vital success elements. It always comes down, for the most part, to these 5 things, right? From a software perspective, it comes down to the functionality in which the system itself and the overall solutions can provide. It comes down to the technology itself, knowing that it's scalable, it's practical, it's flexible to be modified, or at least doing the things we need it to. The business intelligence of, again, using your data to your advantage to identify trends, identify weaknesses, and really lean into the things that work well. Integrations, again, comes right back to the pull responses, right? Of seeing solutions actually talk with one another to give you that streamlined automation that every business is looking for. And then really the last is partnership, right? Are we working with organizations and companies that share a common goal and have your growth in mind? All right, so without further ado, let's jump into what we regard to be the 7 keys to mastering a growing service management industry as a whole. And this is one that Hannah is going to help us touch on. But really, the number one opening item we want to touch on is the concept of workflows and what we call escalations. Escalations being when certain events take place, i.e. a quote needs to be generated, or we found a deficiency in the field, or there's a change order that's been raised, or whatever the scenario might be. How do we effectively manage process? It could be any process. It could be how we take a work order all the way through. It could be how we effectively renew a service agreement for a long-time customer, or perhaps one that maybe isn't a long-time customer, is going through its first renewal exercise, right? It's how do we automate the process to allow us to actually achieve automation. Now, where every software solution I've ever seen comes with some type of workflow process out the box, one of the biggest opportunities missed by so many is how to effectively tailor workflow without making vast, customization to software to help you achieve any level of automation you're seeking. And I'll give you one classic example is we all have that 1, 2, or 3 customers that drive so much of the manual process, yet also drive so much of the revenue. How can a solution even accommodate 1 or 2 or 3 accounts that might require something special? Now, Hannah is certainly an expert in this field, so perhaps Hannah, I'll turn it over to you for your thoughts.
Happy to help. I would like to talk about workflows and escalations independently, even though you can use them in tandem very powerfully. First, I'd like to think about using a workflow. And just to give you a visual, a workflow is really just kind of a button on your screen that the end user can click on. And it can do something very simple from like update the status of a file, from a canceled work order to an on hold one, or, maybe something that's pending dispatch. Or you could use it more complicated purposes, such as maybe doing some code behind, so that clicking on that single button takes a variety of different steps behind the scenes to kind of automate those tedious steps that you might not want the end user to forget about. It really does basically allow a lot of executive oversight within your system without having to actually have the oversight, because those tedious steps that might cause an error down the line can be eliminated. And I want to talk to you about this in the way that you can kind of use a quote workflow to kind of help you generate more business. And that's with regard to the quote workflow. In a normal quoting scenario, you might have a quote that you send to the client. They have an opportunity to review, and then they typically get back to you with an acceptance if, all is well. But let's think about those more complicated scenarios where we might have, a reason for a vendor to put us on hold. We are awaiting those more technical equipment pieces to come in. The client might put us on hold. Somebody's on vacation or the bureaucratic red tape to get that quote approved. Heaven forbid we have to requote or revise something or potentially cancel it because the client changes their mind and doesn't want that quote, or they reject it, or maybe they decide to accept some of it, but not all of it. All of those different unique scenarios that might be something specific to your business or industry can all be accommodated with these workflows. And the best part is that you get to use them in whatever way you see fit. They are really configurable. And I want to emphasize the difference between configuration versus customization, because configuration is something that you can do yourself as the end user within Fieldpoint versus customization, where you might have to pay for programming hours within Fieldpoint. It's configurable so that you can use the terminology that you use today in your own office. And it's incredibly relevant to your business when you're thinking about the onboarding and training efforts, not only, with your new hires, but with the whole go live experience. This was huge for us because we onboarded about 112 users in 9 business days. So that training effort was monumental on our side, and it was extremely helpful with these custom workflows because it made everything feel so familiar. It was just so much more of a fluid experience. Moving on to the escalations, those are within Fieldpoint, basically a way for Fieldpoint to do the dirty work for you and, basically be your friendly big brother looking out for you and notifying you when certain things may happen. In this case, I want to talk about the more practical side of maintaining your business. And I want to talk about timesheet escalations specifically. Those are where we have significant overhead savings. And this is just because we have set up automated emails that are generated by Fieldpoint, and Fieldpoint's smart enough to look up the relevant user to whom to send this email to whenever an employee has forgotten to submit their timesheet. We no longer have to spend hours trying to track down all of our missing timesheets because they're getting those reminders at predefined times for us. And then it's smart enough to know to not send the reminder for those who have successfully submitted their timesheets. It also enables automatic communications between our management team, who does the review of the timesheets, and it communicates to the employee whenever there is a problem with the timesheet, i.e. the manager's rejected the timesheet. It automatically sends a notification to the employee with the reasons for the rejection so they can make the appropriate changes. So there is reduced legwork there administratively. And we don't have any more nervous employees wondering whether they're going to get paid for their forgetful manager either. That's just because they now get an email confirmation when their manager has successfully submitted via the integration from Fieldpoint to our payroll software. And if you are a nervous Nelly yourself and might be concerned about automation because you've maybe watched too many suspense or thriller movies, you don't have to be. We have something that's called the CMIC integration queue. And this actually allows us to see the granular level of transaction by transaction, whether or not the information attempted to be sent by Fieldpoint was successfully sent to your other software. We went live on the 17th, like I told you earlier. We're about a $30 million company, and we have 77,000 records that have been integrated to date. I just checked this morning. So that's 77,000 touches that we did not have to make manually, which is tremendous. So when you use that integration queue in tandem with an escalation, when something fails, I don't have to spend hours of my day clicking through this list that's just ever growing. It actually notifies me when something fails, and it lets me know what happened and why. And so I only have to wait about 1 to 2 minutes to be notified from the system. It's tremendous. And you can actually resend the data after it's failed for the integration for whatever reason. It only takes about 3 to 4 seconds per record. And all of this escalation and workflow, you can configure this yourself with no programming required. My degree is in accounting, not programming. So I was able to do all this myself. So with that said, I'm extremely pleased to know about workflows and escalations, and I'll turn it back to you, Greg.
Hannah, I quite literally couldn't have said it better myself. So thank you very much for that insight. That's just fantastic. and great to hear live examples of how people are really using this stuff today. That's just fantastic. So the next piece for us to touch on really here is just general software flexibility. Again, we hear it all the time, and these are questions that really every service-related vendor is going to be getting. Is just the richness of the flexibility. If I need to change something, can I? Is it a large customization type effort? Is it more of what Hannah refers to as more of your kind of configuration and setup related items? So that workflow is a great example of the typical flexibility. But you also bump into things. In fact, many do around, what if I have one unique process that needs to be managed separately? Or what if I have one client that's driving so much of our business process and they require maybe a different output document to be sent? I don't want to have a new employee have to be trained that they have to do something special for other clients, or some over others. If you're doing this enough, at what stage can flexibility of software help you automate some of these things, hence achieving and fostering that automation, that growth, what allows you to automate and hence overcome that barrier to then grow your business. So this is again another area that's just a question very loosely asked, but usually not enough time is often taken to ensure that solutions are flexible enough to meet the needs of a growing or rapidly growing services enterprise. Okay, the next one on the docket here is reliable mobile. I mean, in 2021 here, mobility and empowering the service technician or the person in the field is just about everything, right? This is the tool that the staff are using to stop people from having to take data back to the office and have things like duplicate entry and things that could be prone to error as being typed in again. It's all about empowering that technician, especially when there's opportunities where perhaps there's a deficiency. Well, I have the technician on site with the data. Can they perhaps get a job done more quickly as a result of having live access to data that's needed, whether it's work that historical technicians have done, or is it looking up data from other business systems directly inside the service system to see things like inventory or items that need to be purchased? Is there the opportunity to do more of a live sort of scheduling if there's like an emergency call just down the road? I don't have to pick up the phone any longer. We're giving these tools directly in the hands of technicians, right? That's what these modern applications are designed to do. So a good reliable mobile isn't just a tool that gives you the functionality. It's things like, what happens if I lose cell signal? Can I still work entirely offline? Some businesses, of course, will have that challenge more than others, particularly those that are working in hospitals or remote areas, for example. Or perhaps those that do a lot of that emergency break fix work, where knowing where technicians are and physically being able to see their location based on mobile technology, GPS tools, can become just so vitally important for some, not only in the sense of empowering the field, but being able to use that data in the field collected to allow us to run a better business. So this is again something that is a very common question, but really is, in our view, one of those keys to unlocking that growth and breaking through that glass ceiling and seeing the organization grow in such a big way. So here's another one that, again, Hannah is going to be an excellent subject matter expert on this topic, but we're going to go back to that workflow scenario just a little bit, because some of that really comes down to properly integrated systems. Now, it doesn't take much to make systems talk, and I'll give examples. You'll commonly see things like exporting some data upon a completion of a call to go to like a survey application to poll customers as to how we did. Or it could be a tool that upon approval of a quote, it creates a work order, a job, or whatever it might be in, say, the service system. It could be a particular customer's requirement to say, you work with one of the big box stores that uses Service Channel or Verisay or Office Tracks or one of these facility programs. It could be just the input and output of data as a result of these integration needs. So properly integrating to us isn't just the pushing of information, it's all the validations along the way. For example, pushing information to and from, like, do I not only receive the information, do I have to send information back, perhaps as we're updating the ticket? Again, those are the kinds of things that the big box stores are really looking for. Is it things like sending a purchase order to accounting? That's fantastic, very much required in so many businesses today. But how do we get the information back? What if there's a purchase price variance? Now, does that throw off all of our job costing? What if something's placed on back order, or there's some sort of delay in the process, or we partially receive something, right? So that whole proper integration really comes down to thinking, is this integration that exists today, is this something that, number one, will do what we need today to give you those properly integrated systems like we saw in the poll question earlier, but also, is it something that's going to foster my growth? How much time and efficiency might I save as a result of having those integrations in place and knowing that I truly can have my staff living in their respective systems, not having to fumble between the apps? So again, this directly comes back to that number one poll response of just wishing all the systems would actually talk. But Ms. Peacock, I'll pass it right back to you because I think you're a great expert on this topic.
Yes. And so I just want to give you some perspective before I jump in of where we were prior to our implementation and integration. We were a paper-based company. So we actually had to provide paper to our technicians, and they were using triplicate carbon copies so that they could record all of their work done on those work orders. They'd have to physically bring them back routinely to our office so that we then could take the information from those work orders, manually duplicate all of that information in not only our ERP accounting system, but also in our service software. So when this came to customer setup, job setup, revenue information, cost, payroll, all of that stuff required duplicate, sometimes quadruplicate information entry in all these different areas. And ultimately, all that time spent made us incredibly slow to invoice, and we were regretful of that. So we actually spent quite a bit of time because we encountered some other frustrations as well, like human errors caused by all these workarounds, inaccurate information simply because we didn't have that time to audit. We couldn't reconcile our reports very well just due to that human error information between the systems. So we actually did that research that I was talking about, and we researched probably about 30 to 35 different service providers with all the pros and cons on our own. And then we got really wise and hired the best consulting firm in the world, in my opinion, ATX Consulting. And they helped us narrow down in on some of these software providers. And we probably, gosh, poor Greg had to answer about 300 different questions that we sent over to him before we even invited him on site for our executive review. So Greg, thanks again for your patience in reviewing that Excel spreadsheet we sent over. But we actually decided to go against the elephant in the room, which was that all-in-one software. There are certainly some advantages to doing so, but it didn't really accommodate our growth and our ambition in the industry. And we just weren't willing to sacrifice all of the wonderful software functionality that Fieldpoint and other best-in-class providers can offer. So we actually decided to do an implementation of Fieldpoint as well at the same point in time as doing an integration with a company called CMIC, which is that ERP construction accounting software that we use. And that enables us to have our customers there, our payroll there. It also has some job costing, the POs, like everything else that you could possibly think of that would be integrated very well with Fieldpoint. But we did both in tandem to actually realize that ROI sooner. And it seems like a lot. Like most people can think about just implementation alone or integration alone. And then that concept and all of the fun things involved with that can seem a bit daunting, but we actually did it. The project really kicked off when I came back from maternity leave because I was the lead on both of those implementation and the integration side here internally. And we went live 364 days after I returned from maternity leave. So it can be done, and it can be done in tandem. But like I said, that wonderful consulting firm that I mentioned, we couldn't have done it without them because the internal developers at Fieldpoint, I'm going to call them developers / consultants because they not only do their own recommendations based upon their knowledge of the industry, but ATX brought so much to the table as well. And in tandem with our experts at Fieldpoint, they were able to manage that project well. And we were able to get all of this done within that year timeframe, which was just impressive. And we did actually survey our own staff internally. And some of our close to retirement age folks have had the pleasure of working elsewhere in their career and have undergone many integrations themselves. I spoke with a gentleman a few weeks ago who had undergone 3 in his career, and he said that this was by far the smoothest. And I just want to state that it was simply due to the tenure of everyone that we worked with. It enabled us to basically get the best of both worlds without sacrificing any best-in-class functionality. Our front-end users were happy because they got to stay in an excellent service software. The back-end users in the accounting and executive realms were very happy because they got their consolidated reporting out of the CMIC software, which all of the other sister companies are using. Our payroll is accurate. We don't have any revenue discrepancies. We don't have wasted overhead dollars spent on duplicate entry. And it's just been a wonderful experience. So I'm going to turn it back over to Greg now to cover the details of exactly how we did this.
I think that was 301 questions, Hannah. But yes, it's and I very much tip my hat at the ATX advisory services group as well. They're just the masters of their trade. That's absolutely for certain. So as we're talking about things like properly integrated solutions, I mean, this was a solution integration that was largely put together, and in a phase 1 setting is largely what you're seeing right here in front of you as well. So versus just the obvious sort of pulling of, say, customer data or pulling of certain amounts of information into one system, these are again bidirectionally integrated solutions that not only push things like the billing, they push things like the timesheet management for things like payroll as well. So when we're talking about a properly integrated solution, especially in like a phase 1 setting like you're seeing here on your screen, this is again the kind of level of integration that we talk about. This is again one of those things that can really be that catalyst to allow and empower organizations to grow and break through that ceiling that we see so often. Okay, so we've got 3 more for you here, and the next one is again not going to be for everybody. It's for those that are doing recurring services, particularly anything along the lines of maintenance, or some might even suggest perhaps there's less of a maintenance requirement, but more so a recurring billing sort of scenario. And for many businesses would come along and say, well, gee, this isn't a big part of the service offering today. But the very last item we're going to see on this presentation today is, keeping up with the Joneses, which is going to be one of the biggest takeaways in my view. But this ends up being one of those things that is maybe the most critical for some organizations, in that this is that mailbox money that keeps you recession proof and keeps that money coming in. Why not automate that to the best of your physical capability to ensure that things like the invoices are going out the door? We're encouraging account managers to have live access to this kind of data. We're having notifications going out early as contracts are expiring. We're prompting emails and such to go out to give people visibility into reasons why they might choose to renew a service if it's not evergreen, for example. So this is that kind of holy grail for so many businesses, saying instead of hunting all the time, this is the piece of that farming portion of the organization. Why not look to automate that as best as we possibly can? And as we look at some of the common challenges, sometimes it's not as easy, in the sense that some client maintenance requirements can be super complex, especially when we're doing work with like big box stores. They might choose that the really high traffic stores might have a little bit more service than say others. So it even comes down to just the richness of the solutions that we put in place to ensure that it even has the ability to meet that level of automation, whether it's the creation of recurring preventive maintenance or changing schedules or fostering increases in schedules. Like we saw a trend, for example, out in California, as there were the fires, you're seeing an increase in the number of PMs that we were seeing on rooftop units, for example. Solutions that can help you to increase that kind of visibility and ultimately increase and optimize revenue. So again, this is very big for many. So 2 more. The next one is sort of inverse to the maintenance piece. A lot of organizations, not all, but many, are doing larger scale jobs. So you'll see this across varying industries, where many are doing your typical service management and maintenance and such. Others might do exclusively larger jobs, whether it's installs or new constructions, or modernization projects like you commonly see in the HVAC and refrigeration businesses, for example. So really good systems will be able to speak with the biggest part of the service delivery, which is projects, right? This is something that very strongly ties into so many aspects of the overall business. It heavily involves sales and design and engineering. It heavily revolves around regulatory and document management, if it's permits or lien waivers, or some businesses have the AIA, American Institute of Architects forms that need to be printed, whether it's the lien waivers form or the G702 and 3 and such. So this is again another opportunity that many don't think to necessarily automate as best as they can, given the uniqueness of every project that comes underway and the uniqueness of every change order and how they're managed, the uniqueness of every billing arrangement that we set with every project. So part of our keys for unlocking this is really figuring out a solution for those that do this in their business today, how you can set things like billing triggers. No matter how you choose to arrange a billing scenario with your client, a well-integrated and properly set up solution allows you to set up any kind of uniqueness for any project that you require, whether it's a fixed bid or something that's billed on a progress billing basis. Again, this can be so critical. Now, Hannah, this is a big part of your organization, so I certainly like to get your input on this as well.
Absolutely. I'd like to talk to you about the project management and job costing side before we jump into the billing triggers. So our ongoing jobs, we like to review them in terms of overall profitability at the end of the job. And that's pretty obvious. Every company would definitely like to have that, but we try to be a bit more proactive on all of our projects as well. So we like to be able to look and immediately drill down into the transaction level. But when you're talking about a $500,000 project, monitoring things at the transaction level can be a bit tedious. So I want to talk to you about the fact that you can kind of get all of this information into a project setup very easily. And then once it's in that project setup, you can kind of see it down to the cost code level. So let's back up a minute and just talk about the conversion of a quote to a project. This happens for us with a single click of a button. That's one of those more complicated workflow buttons that I was talking to you about before, where it just triggers the code. So a single click that says, yep, this has been approved. I'd like to create a project. It just automatically goes in and all of the fields from the quote are mapped to the project. So it takes, maybe about a half a second to go ahead and get that project set up in our system, which is tremendous. That used to be about a 15 to 30-minute job, having to copy all that information in from our offline quotes to our in the system project with our old legacy software. And then because you set it up at the quote level, at the cost code level, that information automatically transitions into the project the same. And so as you're working on that project, all of the people in the field are using their mobile devices, making purchases and doing whatever it is that they need to do, either by the managers or the actual field level technician. And anytime they click save on their mobile device, that's immediately visible here in our portal, the administrative, office side of the house, so that we can see those committed costs. So we're no longer having to wait for the vendors who, might still be using those dot matrix printers. We all have vendors that use those. And they might take us a couple of months to send us an invoice, right? Because they haven't taken the initiative to integrate or implement a new service software. So when that happens and we're working with those committed costs being immediately visible are tremendous, so that we have the opportunity not only to drill down to see that level of information, but the timing of that drill down is imperative so that we can see what's going well or what might not be going so well, what might be going wrong in those instances. So we actually do have a proactive opportunity to make changes in our business process so that we might actually be able to recover some level of profitability there. And when it comes to those ongoing jobs, let's face it, clients change their mind all the time. And with COVID going on, and we service a lot of hospitals, that accessibility can be wildly variant from time to time, right? So we constantly are dealing with change orders that become part of the project. Those two are set up, in the quoting side of the house. And with a single click, they just go in and automatically flow to the appropriate cost codes so that those are updated immediately. We even did a customization so that those quote level attachments, those documents that you send to the client, those contracts that you're saving that are signed, those signed POs, all of those important documents that allow you to invoice expediently are actually saved at the quote level, and then they just automatically convert and flow into the project with that single click. So there is no chance of error. That human error element is completely removed, and it's just a reassurance gained with efficiencies. So we've been incredibly pleased with the project management side of the house, not only for the speed at which you got access to the information, but the ability to drill down to a cost code level and see only those individual transactions just with a click or two. And then I want to move on to the billing triggers that you were mentioning, Greg. I want to let you know that they are extremely flexible. And a billing trigger is essentially a rule that you set up within Fieldpoint so that you can execute an act of an invoice at any point in time. And so I want to emphasize at any point in time, because you can actually invoice a client before the job even begins. And not every system will allow you that flexibility. You can actually accommodate those special need clients that have those year-end budget concerns, the use it or lose it budget, that they're so concerned that they might lose it next year if they don't use it by December 31st. So we can start the job the following February, no problem. We'll just go ahead and invoice you right now. You can invoice them multiple times during the same job. You can invoice upon defined percentages complete. Say once it hits the 10% or the 25% or the 75%, all of that can happen for you. It can be a milestone. It can be like a particular task. You can do a fixed price billing. You can set it up on T&M instead. You can have them set up to automatically regenerate future rules for you so that you don't have to think about making a mistake. It can even do those AIA billings that are so tedious that Greg was talking about. And if you are familiar with AIA billing, yes, Fieldpoint can do it and it does it well. It not only gives you the option for that technical AIA presentation, but it can also give you that progressive billing invoice. And that progressive billing invoice out of the box is an excellent feature as well. A lot of our clients like to see that line by line level as well. And then we further customized Fieldpoint with a variety of different invoice formats, from a single line, basically summarizing all of our labor, material, and expenses into a single summary format, all the way down to the full detail to accommodate, you know, this person was on this site at this day for 8 regular hours and 1 overtime hour. So you can get all of that information. But if you want to throw back to my initial comments, think about that. When you combine that power with escalation, Fieldpoint can automatically alert you if you're about to go over your estimated values. How powerful would that be? So your project manager might be on a 2-week vacation, or say they spontaneously hit the lottery and decided not to come back to work anymore. And if that happens, you can have these emails automatically go out to whomever it is that you would define on your team. And it can be specific to that individual project. And Fieldpoint can be smart enough to look up those values and just automate everything. So it's so seamless. And I just can't say enough about those workflows, the escalations, the ability to customize generally within Fieldpoint, as well as configure. Their configuration tools were the best in class of all 35 or so service softwares that we investigated. And that, in combination with everything else that we've talked about and the more things that Greg will cover, I just want to highly recommend Fieldpoint. From the interaction that I've had with about 16 different programmers on their team so far to date, and our entire experience from sales to the executive review, the project managers and the development, not only for the implementation, but the integration, has been so seamless that I give them 2 thumbs up in my book. And I am hard to impress.
I'm not sure that you are, Hannah. You're a very pleasant person all around. So one day we'll see the angry side of Hannah Mason. I don't think it exists, but yes, thank you. That is really, really awesome feedback, and something I think that gives everybody on the line some things certainly to think about from a ways to make the overall portion of the business better. So thank you so much for that. That's awesome.
My pleasure.
Actually, that takes us then to our last item, right? So this is again something we all hear, but it's something that is just vitally important. I'd like to try to give some examples of keeping up with the trends, or keeping up with the Joneses, or whatever we want to call it, right? It comes down to really 2 things in our view, right? It's seeking the trends not only outside the business, right? What are things that are perhaps changing? Like, you know, we hear a lot about like Internet of Things or IoT, for example. You know, you're starting to see a lot of companies, you know, less so talking about it, more so actually beginning to implement it. Or you're seeing, you know, a growing trend for offering customers access to like self-service portals, not only the ability to create things like service requests, but to go in and have access to things like previous reports or invoices or those kinds of things. So, you know, keeping up with the trends is another one of those things that naturally helps you grow. But the other piece of keeping up with the trends isn't necessarily what's happening across the industry or in the market. It's also just the trends in the business. Like I always reference this with my colleagues. Like you watch those restaurant shows where restaurants are struggling, and some that just haven't been able to break even just yet or what have you. And you often see that analysis of someone coming in saying, did you know that every time you make that signature hamburger, you're losing 16 cents per meal that you serve? And people say, how on earth is that possible? This is another thing that happens in the service business every single day, right? Some flagship services that might be performed, perhaps we might not realize it's as profitable as we thought, or ideally in the other half of this is that it's actually more profitable than we thought. Like, did you know that there's an increasing number of service calls out there for this particular make and model? History shows that we're making a little bit more money on these calls. They're a little bit easier to sell. It's a more ubiquitously deployed asset in the field today, and it's something that our technicians are able to solve or maintain 9% faster than the other makes and models. Gee, maybe that's something that we should be using our business data to then go after in a much bigger way, right? So to us, really, I could simply just write in here, reporting is key, but reporting is only really good if you know what to look for, right? A really good system that allows you to foster that kind of growth will actually help produce some of that data for you, and give you warnings of, hey, here's something that you need to look at, or the kinds of analytics or partners that you work with can share with you, dashboards or examples of, these are the analytics that mean the most, right? Did you see a drop off in your business at some particular time of year, which is unfortunate, but might be just part of the seasonality of business? But did you know that you grew by 18% than you did last year? And did you know that it was primarily based on part sales? You're able to do that portion of the business better, right? So keeping up with the trends isn't, again, just thinking about what's happening in the market and calling the Joneses and seeing what they're doing. A big part of this is really better understanding the trends happening in your own business. And there's plenty of examples. You see a couple of charts here on the screen, but this is just such a huge portion that allows companies to really grow, because the things that perhaps aren't doing as well and trending as well, we know those are the dogs that we focus less on, and we're going to start focusing on the cash cows and the stars, right? So that's just another thing that's really more of an active reminder for folks that are looking to really unlock that portion of growth. But again, something that's just so important. And of course, that takes us here to the close. So only really seeing a couple of questions that came in through the Q&A. If you have any questions for us, please feel welcome to click the Q&A button here on Zoom, and we'll do our best to answer them for you. But I've just got two here that I'm seeing right now, which isn't many, but I'll certainly answer these questions for the group. So the first one that we got is, how are we finding companies are integrating payroll these days? For example, when there are multiple systems like timekeeping, job costing, payroll, et cetera. So likely this is one of the questions asked by someone who answered the properly integrating systems question. And this is a tough one, right? Because the payroll portion is one of the things that involves the most pieces of software. So at least in Fieldpoint's view, where in our view, the service system really becomes the tool that's collecting and being that catcher's mitt of all the time-related data, whether it's overtime, travel time, lunchtime, time gone to a supply house to go buy something. Whether there's overtime or double time, those kinds of things. So we often, as an example, become the collection tool of that. But what we will find is we usually just distribute that time directly to a payroll solution, so that it just has all the data it needs to process payroll. Things like prevailing wage can make that a little bit more complicated, but is indeed possible. But to us, usually we find the reduction of using a pure timesheet collection app and doing that fully inside the service system. Plus your technicians will love you for it, because it's one fewer app that they would have to use in the field. So I'm hopeful that answers your question. Feel welcome to come in the chat again if you have any follow-up. The second question I'm seeing here was around, are we finding that bigger companies today are writing their own software systems? Certainly a lot of them do, or I should say a lot of them did. Today, you're seeing a growing trend that both big and small companies are focusing less on like building Microsoft Access systems or going out and provisioning their own custom software. You might see larger companies going to provision that, typically because they're not flexible and don't have all those particular pieces that they need, and they're not finding partners that have all those pieces to sort of scale with them. But this is, again, something we saw a lot of many years ago. Less so today for a couple reasons. Number one, if you go on a site like capterra.com, there are hundreds of solutions, maybe thousands of solutions out there to at least get an organization's foot in the door. But again, as companies grow, your likelihood of building something custom becomes greater and greater. But if I rely on even Hannah's points from before, we're not big believers here in Fieldpoint of encouraging like an HVAC business to get into the software business. We're larger proponents here for buying off the rack, but giving you the ability to tailor that suit to exactly fit your needs, which is certainly a lot less daunting and expensive than starting to cut some cloth from scratch.
Yes. And Greg, I actually used to work for an insurance brokerage firm for about 10 years. And we actually used one of those Microsoft Access database systems that was proprietary. So we actually had only one programmer worldwide who was intimately familiar with how our program worked. And he went camping one weekend. And I can let you know our system crashed. It was very, very difficult to get back up online. And nobody else knew what was going on unless you had the ability to go in and figure that out. So from that experience alone, we were down and it was toward year end where we had a bunch of renewals. So I would never go back to that, having experienced the stability within Fieldpoint. We've certainly been on this for quite some time, having gone live. And I can tell you that we've probably invoiced about over $5 million in revenue so far out of Fieldpoint with about 1,700 invoices. And obviously that means lots of jobs and customer setup, et cetera. We've had no security concerns whatsoever, nor have we had any speed concerns. And its general accessibility is tremendous. And we don't have any maintenance locally on any of our machines. So we actually get to control our upgrades to different versions. And we've had the ability to review those release notes with programmers and make that internal decision whether we want to take advantage of that or just take our destiny in our own hands and stay on our own stable platform, which is known and tested. So there are lots of perks and things that Fieldpoint can offer you as an end user. So if you are concerned about the cloud-based systems, I really haven't been concerned about any of those negative things that I've found in my research before we decided to move to a cloud-based system. So I've been very pleased so far to date.
Awesome, Hannah. Thank you so much for chiming in as always. And of course, if anyone's looking for the number one HVAC mechanical contractor in the continent, you of course know to go to Hannah and her team. They're just the best. So on that note, I think Morgan, I'll turn it back to you, but I do want to personally thank everybody for joining. And I think Morgan, I'll pass the microphone to you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for joining us today, both Greg and Hannah. And a special thanks to our audience for chiming in today and asking those great questions. Thank you all for such an amazing session. If you submitted a question that we didn't get to today, we will follow up with you by email shortly. And you can also look forward to receiving an on-demand link to this presentation directly to your email inbox. So keep a lookout for that. And also feel free to share this with your team so they can get in on the conversation too. And if you'd like, feel free to stick around for a few seconds to leave some feedback and suggestions for us in our survey. And we'll use this feedback to just keep giving you exactly the type of content that you're looking for in the future. And so with that, we're going to bring this program to an end. And on behalf of Fieldpoint, Field Service, and the WPR Insights team, we thank you for your time. Have a great day, everyone.